It's great to welcome to the program today Robert Sapolsky, scientist, New York Times bestselling author. The new book is Determined, A Science of Life Without Free Will. I know many in our audience, Robert, know you from YouTube video series, which are incredible in the number of times they've been viewed and shared. And it's so great to have you on. I really appreciate your time.
Well, thanks. Thanks for having me on.
Maybe just to start with, I'm curious how your perspective has evolved from previous books in terms of the relationship between nature and nurture in shaping human behavior. And one of the things that may not come as a shock to our audience is that different subspecialties will have different conclusions on the nature of that interplay, nature and nurture in shaping human behavior. And if I understand your sort of background correctly, your view on this has evolved to some degree over time. Is that right?
Well, I guess I was a bit more of a sort of genetic fundamentalist back when, in terms of thinking about the importance of nature. Where I stand now is what I think any rational person in the business would come up with, which is this obligatory, ooh, it's not nature, it's not nurture, it's the vastly complex, gorgeous interactions between the two. So much so that asking which contributes more is like saying what contributes more to the area of a rectangle, the length or the width, that
Right.
the interactions are all there are.
When you think about the concept of free will and determinism, which is in some way inextricably linked with this conversation as well, um, it seems that what I believe is called the compatibilist view has emerged as popular, at least in casual discussions over the last 5 to 10 years. The idea being that to some degree, our inputs, including everything that has happened so far in the universe, has an impact on future events, but that also provides wiggle room within which chance, odds, and preferences can still impose to some degree free will. First of all, am I accurately explaining what that compatibilist view is? And where are you on that at this point in time?
Okay, that's a perfect description, and like official polls have shown about 90% of philosophers ascribe to this, and probably a larger percentage of like regular old folks out there, which is the view that, you're willing to admit the world is made of like little things. There's atoms, there's cells, there's like science is okay. It describes the way the universe works. You ascribe to a contemporary view about like us and our brains are based on neurons. And yet somehow that is compatible with your notion of wiggle room. Somewhere in there, there's an ability to sidestep all of that when generating behavior and exercising free will that has nothing to do with all that science stuff. And in that regard, I count as what would be called a hard incompatibilist. You can't have like the rules of the universe and how they have come about to construct our brains and a belief in free will. You can't have both together.
So let's explore that a little more. I think I'm curious to hear from you what you see as the reasons why so many people seem to resist that. To me, it seems obvious that one of the reasons would be if it is all predetermined, there is less meaning than I believe there is to what I think are the choices I am making, right? Decisions about what job to take, where to move, whether or not to have children, etc. If it's really all been predetermined at the atomic and neuronal level to some degree, it seems that it would remove a lot of meaning from the choices we perceive we have, right? I mean, is you tell me.
Yeah. Basically, yes, absolutely. And people, when you try to say there's no free will, their first response is, oh my God, that really can't be true. Because people will just run amok if they start believing that. That could be addressed. Ooh, we'll have murderers running around on the streets. No, we won't. Ooh, we'll have random incompetent people taking out your brain tumors. No, it doesn't mean that merit winds up not being important. Ooh, it means nothing can ever change. It means anything but that. But at the core of it, it means we're just biological machines. And that's unnerving as hell to a lot of people. And often on this deeply fundamental level of what does it mean that we are nothing more or less than the outcome of what biology interacting with environment, running on sheer chance, has done in making us who we are.
Now, when we talk about this idea of outcomes being predetermined, imagine something like some increase in criminality of a certain kind in a certain area. And then people meet and they say, how could we reduce the amount of criminality of this type? A program is conceived, it's funded, and indeed, fewer people end up committing this particular crime. In some sense, you could say, well, it's all the outcome of the way that neurons and atoms and everything were aligned. The initial crimes that led to the meeting about reducing crime, that was predetermined. And then the meeting about how it was all predetermined in that way. But it certainly has the appearance that there are circumstances causing others to react in ways they wouldn't necessarily, and it feels as though there's agency there. Explain how there would not be if there is indeed no free will.
Well, what we're up against is this perception of how real, how tangible it feels when we make a choice. Ooh, should I pick vanilla or chocolate ice cream? Ooh, should I pull the trigger or not on this gun? In that moment, usually, unless we're just working reflexively, and that's not where the most interesting stuff is happening. But at that moment, you are filled with intent. You know that you want to do what you were doing. You know what the likely outcome is going to be. And really importantly, you know there's alternatives. You're not being forced to do this. I don't have to do this. I could do something else. And yet I will choose to do this. I will form this intent and act upon it. And where people really get gummed up with the sense that, oh, of course we have free will, is how real, how powerful that moment seems. And I think the starting point of kind of scientifically trying to dissect, deconstruct a view of free will is that if that's your basis for making judgments about this, you are being asked to review a movie based on only having seen the last 3 minutes of it, because having this whole issue, ooh, are you consciously intentful? There's alternatives, the consequences, ignores the question that is the only one to ask, which is, whoa, how do you wind up becoming the sort of person who would form that intent? Where
Hmm.
did that intent come from? And what that intent came from is everything that went on a second ago and the things that went on a second before and all the biological, environmental, etc., blah blah stuff over which you had no control, that turned you into the sort of person who would do what you did at that point, whether it would be committing that sort of crime or deciding we can take action and as a group have efficacy to do something to reduce crime, or deciding that chocolate sounds oh so much better than Rocky Road at the moment.
When we think about free will in terms of individual choices versus elements that have some kind of random component, and I'll give you an example. I was born in Argentina, and in 1989, my dad won the Visa lottery, right? And so he was able to, as a doctor, move to the United States. And everything that has happened in my life in some way, maybe not my personality, maybe not, my earlobe growth or whatever, but a lot of things in my life, societally, certainly, were dependent on that. Now, you could say, certainly, that the inputs led to my family being in a place where we decided, let's apply for the Visa lottery. There was some random element, seemingly, to who gets that Visa lottery. Does the no free will perspective argue that the winners of the Visa lottery are also predetermined?
No, but what it argues mostly is that random events, A, are probably perceived to be random events more frequently than they actually are, but B, most importantly, are not the basis for deciding you have free will. If random lotteries of like exit visas or random lotteries of Brownian motion of your molecules are
Right.
the supposed basis for what you would call your character, your backbone, your values, your more, that's like really problematic. And that
Hmm.
addresses like there's one sort of, oh no, 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 there really is free will. The world really isn't deterministic because this phenomenon of quantum indeterminacy. And like I spend 2 chapters trying to dissect that. And it's the notion that, according to most people who understand the stuff, which I sure don't, elements of the universe at the subatomic level really are indeterministic and random and all of that. And nonetheless, that is not where behavior is coming from. And if it were where behavior would coming from, it would describe why everything we would do would be random. Philosopher Sam Harris says, if that were the case, you'd spend every moment saying, whoa, wow, I had no idea why I just said that. And I have no idea why I just said that. And that's not a basis for like what, when people are thinking about free will and the choices you make, they're thinking about how at your funeral, your oldest friend is going to get up and say, wow, even in kindergarten, they were already that sort of person. There was
Hmm.
already that and randomness is not where you're going to get that from. So the fact that there are random elements to our behavior, and you can show that sometimes neurons do random thing, but nonetheless, that's not sort of the basis of like hitching one's wagon to we are free agents out there.
In the book, you argue for a more humane world as you see it and as you define it. And as someone who wants to raise the standard of living around the world, and I have goals that I believe line up with that, I'm curious how we harness this perspective on free will that you have in order to achieve that. Let's say we all agree, okay, there's no free will. Now what do we do to end up with a more humane world?
Great. We do what we have done over and over and over. Because sort of the starting point is we have a world in which we are okay with treating some people way better than average because of things they had nothing to do with, and some people way worse than average because the things they had no control over, and then preaching gibberish about how this is a just world and people get what they deserve. And every time we have figured out, actually, that's a realm in which people actually didn't have responsibility over what they did. We figured out at one point, amazingly, the old woman at the edge of the village who nobody talks to, who has no teeth, doesn't really have control over the weather. She's really not a witch. And it's silly to burn her at the stake when there's an unexpected ice storm. We subtracted responsibility out of our picture of where rotten weather comes from. And whoa, it's a better world that we don't burn people at the stake for thinking that they're witches.
So
And
let me make sure I understand this example. So in a sense, you're saying if we all have a recognition that to a great degree, the circumstance of individuals is not their quote fault or responsibility, even, are we saying? Then
yeah,
we would say, well, as a result, we should certainly treat everybody well and more equally. Is that the argument?
yeah, absolutely the case. Because if you take these sort of biological nuts and bolts scientific argument that we're nothing more or less than the sum of everything that came before, etc., um, at the end of that, what that has to mean is blame and punishment make no sense whatsoever.
Hmm.
Praise and reward make no sense whatsoever. The criminal justice system is as irrational as is a meritocracy, that all we are biological machines. And if you truly believe that, you are entitled to nothing more or less than any other person because there's nothing about you that you have earned. And often when people have their first panic, oh, come on, there's got to be free will. It's the are you telling me you're just going to have murderers running around on the street and no responsibility? When people really sort of marinate in the implications, what they're really saying is, wait a second, I just did something nice or smart or creative or kind or whatever. Are you telling me I didn't actually deserve the praise that I get for it? That's what
Well,
really
that's fair,
gets.
but what about the murderers, right? I mean, on a practical level, if the murder that was committed was just the result of essentially programming and neurons and atoms, what should we not imprison murderers?
Oh, absolutely not. Does that mean we should have them running around on the streets? Absolutely not. We have learned over and over that we are able to subtract out responsibility out of some realms that most people find to be adverse in its impact on society. We can subtract out responsibility and still keep people safe. And all you have to work with is what people in the business call a quarantine model.
Hmm.
All you have to recognize is, yes, some people are dangerous through no fault of their own, through no achievement of their own, through nothing of their own. That's how it turned out with them. And you can't have dangerous people damaging other people. And you simply need to prevent that from happening.
Isn't that the point of putting them in prison?
No, because what the whole prison system is built around is also a notion of retribution.
Hmm.
There is justice, that there is virtue in and of itself in punishing somebody for their actions. And that makes no sense at all. And when you view whether how laws work on a formal legal level or how the brain is working in a brain image, or when you get to punish somebody, what is being mostly driven by is retribution, by a notion
I
that,
agree that the legal system in great part is about revenge and retribution, but in practical terms, what does the quarantine method look like? It's the separation without a system that seeks revenge or retribution. What does it look like?
yeah, and the formal building blocks are, yeah, you constrain the dangerous behavior. You do the absolute what's needed to protect everyone, not 1 inch more than that. Not one smidgen more. You don't preach to the person that they've gotten a rotten soul that's produced that sort of brain.
Mm.
And also, as sort of a starting sort of moral imperative of people who apply this in public health all the time, go figure out what causes people to become damaging in that kind of sort of way. Look at root causes. Oh my God, this sounds so implausible and, utopian. And we do that all the time.
No, I
Here's
mean,
an
it sounds
example.
more like the prison system in Norway, quite frankly. It doesn't sound that far off from things that exist.
Absolutely. And it's the first of the baby steps in that direction.
Mm.
Absolutely. And the flip side applies just as much. Yeah, have a world in which we constrain the danger of incompetent people doing tough stuff. Yeah, make sure your brain surgeons are competent. Make sure your auto mechanics are competent. Make sure it's not random, all of that. But don't have people coming out the other end of having those skills thinking that that entitles them to better treatment than anybody else. And this whole notion, again, oh my God, that's ridiculously starry-eyed. We do that all the time. And here's an example that constantly comes to mind, a
Yeah.
circumstance where we have someone who's dangerous, where everyone agrees they're dangerous. It's not like in the eye of the beholder or cultural relativism, or someone who will damage innocent people around them. And we have figured out a way to prevent that from happening with subtracting free will completely out of it. What am I talking about? Your kid, your 5-year-old kid is sneezing a lot, and you keep them home from kindergarten tomorrow because it's clear if they go, they have an increased chance of sneezing all over and the school says, if your child has a cold, please keep them home. Please keep them home, constrain their behavior. Don't keep them home and then say, ooh, you're a bad child for sneezing on the other kids in there. You can't play with your toys today, or you have a rotten soul. Like, simply constrain the behavior in a purely instrumental way. And oh, also put some work into figuring out where nose colds come from, root causes. And we run the world on that. And in effect, what we're saying there is there's no free will when it comes to kindergartners sneezing on each other. And
Right.
nonetheless, we could design a world in which your child is safe from the kid's runny nose next to them, and we could do it without judgment. And we do that in so many realms without even thinking about it, that we don't recognize those are realms where we have said, oh, actually, we don't have responsibility in that. Yeah, free will is ridiculous there. Kids don't decide to have nose colds and they don't decide to change the weather because they're sleeping with Satan. And like you could run a world and recognizing it doesn't work that way. And not only doesn't the roof cave in, it's a much better world in which we don't burn people at the stake for being witches or for getting nose colds. Every time we subtract a notion of free will and responsibility out of this sort of thing, including the notion of free will when we look at the people who were born on third base and claim they've hit a home run when they get to home base at that
Right.
point. Every time you do that, you know, you're making the world a more humane place. It's not a disaster when we recognize that we are nothing more or less than the luck that preceded us. But it makes for a much more humane world because we're constantly treating people better or worse than we should based on things they had nothing to do with.
We've been speaking with Robert Sapolsky. The new book is Determined, A Science of Life Without Free Will. Really appreciate your time and insights today. Thank you.
Well, a huge pleasure. Thanks for having me on.